In a world filled with noise, distractions, and confusion, it's easy to feel that your heart's cry goes unheard. It seems like no matter how much you speak, how much you pray, or how much you try to reach out, your voice is lost in the vast ocean of the world's demands. We all experience pain, emotional pain, physical pain, spiritual pain, and we often ask ourselves, does anyone hear me? Does anyone feel what I am going through? It's in these moments of vulnerability and isolation that we can begin to doubt the very thing that we hold dear, that God is listening, that He sees us, and that He cares. But let me assure you, God does hear. He hears the deepest cries of your heart. He feels the weight of your pain in ways that you cannot even fathom. The scriptures remind us that He is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. It's not just an abstract concept or a distant theological truth. It is a living reality. Now let's pause for a moment to reflect on something profound. If you truly understood the depth of God's love, if you could truly comprehend how He sees you, you would realize that your pain is never in vain. Every tear that falls from your eye is not unnoticed. Every sigh that escapes your lips does not go unheard. In the grandness of the universe, God sees you. He knows you intimately, and He knows your struggles. Why is this so important to understand? Because it speaks to the essence of God's nature. We live in a world where people often see you only for what they want to see. People look at your exterior, judge your actions, and make assumptions based on appearances. But God doesn't operate in that way. He does not judge you based on your external situation, your current failures, or even your mistakes. God sees straight to your heart. He knows your intentions, your desires, your fears, and your dreams. He feels the hurt you carry, the burdens that weigh on you, and the silent cries that you think no one notices. There's a beautiful truth in knowing that God hears your heart. It means that you do not have to perform for Him. You do not have to hide your pain behind a mask of strength or perfection. He doesn't need you to put on a facade. He needs you to come to Him just as you are broken, weary, burdened, and He will hear you. You do not have to have the right words, the right prayers, or the right posture. All He requires is your heart, and He will meet you exactly where you are. God feels your pain. This is a message that is often overlooked, yet it is so vital for us to understand. When we face pain, when we face suffering, it is easy to feel abandoned. We wonder where God is in the midst of our sorrow. We ask, why me, God, or why this, God? And it is in these moments of questioning that the enemy seeks to isolate us. He tries to convince us that God is distant, that God doesn't care, that God has forgotten about us. But the reality is that God is not distant from your pain. God does not remain unaffected by your struggles. The heart of the Father beats in tune with your pain. He feels it. He understands it in ways that no human being can comprehend. This is not an abstract theological concept. This is truth that has been revealed throughout Scripture. God is not an uninvolved, detached observer. He is the one who enters into your pain, into your suffering, and says, I am with you. God knows what it's like to suffer. He knows what it's like to experience betrayal, to face rejection, and to endure injustice. He does not turn away from your suffering, but He draws near. The God who created the heavens and the earth is the same God who was intimately present in the pain of His Son on the cross. God, in His infinite love, chose to experience the depths of human suffering so that He could truly understand and feel what you are going through. This should bring immense comfort. You are not alone in your pain. God is not indifferent to your struggles. He is right there with you in the midst of it all. He is walking with you through every dark valley, feeling every heartbreak, and sharing in your burdens. And here is the most amazing part. He is not just a passive observer. He is a God of action. He is a God who redeems, restores, and heals. His presence in your pain is not meant to leave you in your sorrow forever. He is working, even when you cannot see it, to bring about a greater purpose through your suffering. There is a plan. There is hope. There is restoration. Let us consider for a moment the nature of God's love. It is often described as unconditional, unending, and infinite. But what does that mean in practical terms? It means that no matter how far you feel from God, no matter how much pain you are experiencing, He will never turn His back on you. His love for you is not based on your performance, on your successes, or on your ability to have it all together. His love is a love that sees you in your brokenness and reaches out to you in the most tender, compassionate way. When we think about God's love, we must remember that it is not just an emotion, not just a warm feeling or a passing sentiment. It is an action. God's love is not abstract. It is active. It is alive and is the most powerful force in the universe. God's love is a love that transcends time, space, and circumstance. It is a love that was made manifest through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross. That is the depth to which God has gone to demonstrate His love for you. When we face trials, we often feel that we are alone, that no one understands, and that our suffering is beyond comprehension. But there is nothing beyond the reach of God's love. There is no pain, no heartbreak, no disappointment that is too great for His heart to feel. He is not only listening to you, He is actively involved in your healing process. Every pain you experience is an opportunity for God's power to be revealed in your life. God's heart beats in rhythm with your heart. He knows when your heart is breaking. He knows when it is heavy with grief, when it is overwhelmed with fear, or when it is burdened with uncertainty. His presence is near, and He is not untouched by your pain. In fact, it is in your weakness that His strength is made perfect. It is in the moments when you feel like you have nothing left to give that His grace pours out most abundantly. There is no pain that God cannot use. He uses your suffering to draw you closer to Him, to teach you, and to mold you into the person He has called you to be. Every tear you shed is an opportunity for God's glory to be revealed. Every moment of pain is an opportunity for God's love to break through. Your pain has a purpose. It may not always be easy to see it in the moment, but God is working behind the scenes, transforming your pain into something beautiful. When we understand that God hears our hearts and feels our pain, it changes the way we approach suffering. We no longer view our struggles as meaningless or as something to be avoided at all costs. We begin to see that God is working in the midst of our pain, that He is drawing us nearer to Him, and that through it all, He is revealing His greatness. Our pain becomes a tool that God uses to refine us, to purify us, and to make us more like Him. This is not to say that suffering is easy, or that we should minimize our pain. Pain is real, and it is difficult to endure. But when we understand that God is right there with us, that He feels our pain and hears our cries, it gives us the strength to keep going. We can take comfort in knowing that we are not alone, that God is not indifferent to our suffering, and that He is working to bring about good in the midst of it. We must also recognize that God's love is not just for us individually, but for the world. As God hears your heart and feels your pain, He also calls you to extend that same love to others. He calls you to be a source of comfort, a source of hope, and a source of healing to those around you. As you experience the depth of God's love, you are called to share that love with others who are hurting, others who are struggling, and others who need to know that they are seen and heard. God's love is not something that we hoard for ourselves. It is something that overflows from us and touches the lives of those around us. When you understand that God hears your heart and feels your pain, it enables you to be a vessel of compassion to others. You are called to be a reflection of God's love, to be a beacon of hope in a world that is full of suffering. Remember this: God hears your heart and He feels your pain. You are not alone in your struggles. Your pain is not meaningless. God is with you in the midst of it, and he is working to bring healing and restoration. Trust in his love, lean into his presence, and know that even when it seems like the world has forgotten you, he has not. He is ever present, standing beside you, feeling every ache of your heart, and working in ways that are beyond your understanding. When we learn to truly trust in God's presence during our pain, we begin to transform the way we live. Pain no longer becomes something we seek to escape from, but something we embrace as part of God's refining process. It becomes a pathway to a deeper relationship with him, a means by which we are drawn closer to the source of all comfort and healing. This transformation in our perspective changes everything. When we acknowledge that God hears our heart, we begin to experience a peace that surpasses understanding. This peace is not the absence of pain or difficulty, but the assurance that God is with us in the storm. It is the quiet confidence that he is not only aware of our struggles, but is actively working through them. This kind of peace is not something that the world can give it. It's something that comes only from the presence of a loving and compassionate God. Understanding that God feels our pain also encourages us to develop a deeper sense of empathy and compassion for others. When you know that God has shared in your suffering, it changes how you see others who are hurting. You no longer view them with indifference or pity, but with genuine concern. Because you know the depth of their pain, you begin to offer them the same comfort and understanding that you have received from God. And in doing so, you become an extension of God's love, a conduit through which his healing touch can reach the brokenhearted. There is power in knowing that God hears and feels your pain, because it shifts your focus from self-pity to hope, from despair to expectation. When you know that God is intimately acquainted with your grief, you begin to trust in his ability to turn your mourning into dancing, to turn your sorrow into joy. You are not just enduring pain for the sake of enduring it, you are being shaped by it. Every moment of suffering, every trial, every heartache is an opportunity for you to grow stronger in faith, deeper in trust, and more reliant on his grace. But perhaps the greatest truth of all is that God does not leave us in our pain. He does not leave us to suffer without purpose. When he hears your heart, he answers. It may not always be in the way we expect, but God is always working for your good. His timing is perfect, and his plan for you is greater than anything you could ever imagine. Every hardship you face is an opportunity for God to reveal more of himself to you. You may not see it right now, but the pain you are experiencing will ultimately be a stepping stone to greater growth, greater strength, and greater understanding of God's character. This is the heart of the gospel. Jesus, who experienced the deepest pain imaginable on the cross, did not do so just for himself. He did it for you and for me. He took upon himself all the pain and suffering of the world so that we could know that God is not distant from our pain, but very near. He took upon himself the weight of our sorrow so that we might experience the depth of God's love and healing power. There is no suffering too great that God cannot overcome it. There is no pain too deep that his love cannot heal it. His love is the balm that soothes the deepest wounds. As we continue to face the challenges of life, let us hold tightly to this truth: God hears your heart and feels your pain. You are not forgotten. You are not abandoned. He is with you every step of the way, sharing in your sorrow and bringing hope to your hopelessness. He sees you in your darkest hour, and he will never let go of you. His love for you is steadfast and unshakable. Even in your pain, he is at work. Even when you don't understand why things are happening, trust that he is with you, and he is turning your trials into triumphs. I know that some of you may be going through difficult seasons right now. Some of you may be battling with deep emotional wounds, physical pain, or spiritual struggles. But I want to remind you that God hears you. He sees you. He knows exactly what you're going through. You are not alone in your pain. There is a greater purpose in your suffering. And in the fullness of time, God will reveal the beauty that comes from the ashes of your pain. His grace is sufficient for you. His strength is made perfect in your weakness. And His love will never leave you. God, in His infinite mercy, invites you to lean into Him in your pain. He is not just a distant observer. He's a present help in time of trouble. Let His love heal you. Let His presence restore you. Let His peace fill your heart and mind. You don't have to carry your burdens alone. God is with you, and He is working in ways that you cannot see right now, but will one day fully understand. Trust that in the middle of your pain there is purpose. Trust that in the midst of your suffering, God is near. He hears your heart. He feels your pain. And He is moving in your life. Trust that He is working things out for your good, even when you can't see the way forward. When you embrace this truth that God hears you, that He feels your pain, and that He is with you in your suffering, something powerful happens inside of you. It frees you from the shackles of despair and opens your heart to hope. It empowers you to move forward, not in your own strength, but in the strength that God provides. It allows you to see that your pain is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of something greater. It is the beginning of a new chapter in your life. One where you learn to trust God more deeply, to love Him more fully, and to experience His grace more profoundly. As you continue your journey, remember this: God hears your heart. He feels your pain, and He is working in you and through you. No matter what you are facing, know that you are not alone. You are loved, you are seen, and you are held in the arms of a compassionate and powerful God. And in the end, it is His love, His grace, and His presence that will carry you through every trial, every hardship, and every moment of pain. So let your heart rest in the assurance that God has heard you and that He will never leave you. His love is everlasting and His promises are true. Whatever you are going through, know this: He is right there with you, feeling every heartbeat, sharing in every tear, and walking with you through every valley. You are never alone, for the one who created you, who loves you, and who is present with you in your pain is the one who will see you through to victory. Let this truth dwell deeply in your soul. God hears your heart and feels your pain. And because He does, you can face whatever lies ahead with hope, courage, and an unshakable confidence in His love. Continuing on this journey, as you sit with this truth that God hears your heart and feels your pain, you begin to realize that it isn't just a one-time moment of realization. It is a transformative truth, something that shifts the very foundation of how we perceive the world and ourselves. The challenges of life, the trials, the pain, they no longer become things that we view solely through the lens of despair. They become opportunities, moments of refining, chances for deeper intimacy with God. God's ability to relate to our suffering isn't merely an abstract theological concept or something He claims because of His omnipotence. It's something He lived out in the person of Jesus Christ. When we look at Jesus, we don't just see a distant figure who preached lofty ideals. We see God incarnate, God who became human, experienced pain, sorrow, betrayal, and ultimately death on the cross. His suffering was not for His own sake, but for ours. When He hung on that cross, He took upon Himself every hurt, every grief, every pain of the human experience. In that moment, God did not distance Himself from suffering. He entered into it fully. It was not an accident that Jesus experienced rejection, abandonment, and anguish. It was part of God's ultimate purpose for redemption. Jesus did not only come to deliver us from the consequences of sin, He came to fully understand the human condition, to be able to say to you and me, I know what it is to suffer. I know what it is to hurt. I know what it is to hurt. I know what it feels like when the weight of the world presses in on you. There is profound comfort in knowing that Jesus, in his humanity, experienced the very depths of pain. He wept at the death of his friend Lazarus. He felt the sting of rejection when the people he loved turned away. He even cried out in his final moments, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This cry, recorded in Scripture, is not one of weakness, but one of identification with the human condition. It is a statement that says, I understand, I feel what you're feeling. You see, when we go through our own moments of pain, loss, or confusion, we are never going through them alone. God, in the person of Jesus, has walked the road before us. He has entered into our suffering, and he remains present with us, guiding us through it. The pain of this world is not without purpose when we place it in the hands of a loving God. His love becomes the lens through which we view our trials. His presence becomes the anchor in our storms. We need to recognize that the suffering we face, though difficult, is not an indicator that God has abandoned us. Quite the opposite, in fact. The Scriptures remind us that we will face trials, but that God will be with us in those trials. He doesn't promise an absence of pain, but he does promise his presence in the midst of it. There is no moment too dark, no pain too great, that God is not right there with you. He feels every burden you carry. He sees every tear that falls. And he moves in ways that we may not always understand, but he is always working toward our good, bringing healing and restoration, even in the midst of brokenness. Pain, when viewed through the lens of God's heart for us, becomes the medium through which he refines us, transforms us, and draws us closer to him. We may not always know why we are going through certain experiences, why suffering touches our lives, or why we face such hardships. But we do know this God is with us. His word tells us that he is near to the brokenhearted, that he collects every tear, and that he works all things together for our good. Even when we cannot see the way forward, we can trust that God is working behind the scenes to turn our mourning into dancing and our sorrow into joy. There is also something very powerful in recognizing that God hears our hearts, even when words fail us. There are moments in life when we find ourselves in such deep anguish that we cannot even form words to pray. Our hearts ache in ways that are beyond expression. And we wonder how we can go to God when we feel so weak. Yet even in those moments when we cannot articulate our pain, God understands. In fact, he understands better than we do ourselves. Romans 8:26 reminds us that the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. This verse offers such profound hope. Even when we don't have the words, the Holy Spirit prays on our behalf. God knows the depths of our pain, even when we cannot find the language to express it. Our hearts, broken and burdened, cry out to God in ways that transcend words, and God hears it all. This is why it's so important to know that prayer is not just about speaking words. Prayer is about the posture of your heart. It's about bringing yourself before God in all your rawness and vulnerability, and trusting that he hears you, even when you feel too weak to say anything. You don't need to be perfect in your prayers. You don't need to have all the right words. What matters most is your willingness to bring your heart to God, to trust that he hears you, and to allow him to move in your life, even in the silent moments. God understands your struggles in ways that you will never fully comprehend. His heart beats for you in a way that is deeper than anything we can fathom. And he does not just hear the words you say, but the heart from which they come. Every cry, every whisper, every silent plea, God hears it all. He is intimately acquainted with your pain, and he responds with compassion, mercy, and love. His desire is to heal, to restore, and to bring you into a deeper relationship with himself. Understanding this gives us a new perspective on our relationship with God. It no longer becomes about trying to perform or striving to measure up. It becomes about coming to God in complete honesty, knowing that he already knows what you are going through and that he wants to meet you in your pain. It's in these moments of vulnerability that God does some of his deepest work in us. He draws near when we draw near, and he begins to heal our brokenness when we are willing to surrender it to him. But this doesn't mean that we remain passive in the face of pain. When we trust that God hears our heart and feels our pain, we also trust that he will help us walk through it. God never leaves us to walk through pain alone. He walks beside us, guides us, and provides the strength we need to endure. Even in the most difficult moments, he gives us the grace to keep going. And as we allow him to work in us, we begin to see our circumstances differently. We begin to see them not as insurmountable obstacles, but as opportunities for God's glory to be revealed in us. There is healing in God's presence. There is restoration in his love. No matter where you are today, no matter how deep the pain you feel, God hears you. He feels your pain. And he is here not just to listen, but to heal, to restore, and to bring you into a place of peace that passes all understanding. In the quiet moments when you are alone with your thoughts, when your heart is heavy, remember that God is not distant. He is right there with you, holding you, feeling your pain, and working in ways that you may not always see or understand. You are never alone. God is with you. His love for you is deep, unshakable, and everlasting. When you cry out, he hears. When you hurt, he feels. When you are lost, he is the one who finds you. Let this truth guide you through every season of life. Whatever you face, no matter how painful or challenging, remember God hears your heart and he feels your pain. And in his perfect timing, he will bring you through to a place of healing, restoration, and peace. As we continue to reflect on the profound truth that God hears your heart and feels your pain, we must understand the immense depth of this relationship. The creator of the universe, the one who formed the stars and set the planets in motion, chooses to be intimately involved with you in your moments of suffering. That alone is a remarkable thought. He is not a distant, detached deity, unbothered by the struggles of his people. No, he is a God who knows every hair on your head, every thought that crosses your mind, and every ache in your heart. This is the beauty of the relationship we are invited into with God. He is not only our creator, but also our comforter, our healer, our ever-present help in times of trouble. But he doesn't just watch from afar. He enters into our lives, sharing in our burdens and offering us the comfort that only he can provide. We are never alone in our struggles, and we are never without hope, because God is with us always. It's easy in times of pain to feel isolated. You might look around and see others going about their lives, seemingly untouched by the difficulties that weigh on your heart. It can feel as if your pain is unique to you, and in that isolation, you can sometimes wonder if anyone truly understands. But God does. God understands in a way that no one else can. He doesn't just know about your pain, he feels it with you. He knows it in the deepest parts of his being, because he is not just aware of your circumstances, he is with you in the middle of your suffering. In the moments when you feel alone, God is there. In your darkest hours, when you think no one can hear your cries, God is listening. His ears are attuned to the sound of your heart, and he is moved by your pain. The Bible tells us that Jesus, in his earthly ministry, was moved with compassion for the hurting. He wept with those who wept. He healed the brokenhearted, restored the outcast, and gave hope to the hopeless. In your pain, God is there, moving toward you with love and grace. He does not condemn you for your tears or for your struggle. Instead, he embraces you, offering his shoulder to lean on, his arms to hold you. He is there not to judge, but to comfort, not to criticize, but to heal. But this doesn't mean that God only feels our pain. He also offers us the strength to walk through it. God does not promise that we won't face pain, but He does promise that we won't face it alone. His presence is the constant reminder that we are not abandoned in our suffering. In fact, His presence is what allows us to endure, to rise above the circumstances that would otherwise overwhelm us. In your moment of pain, God is not absent. He is near. And when you allow Him into the depths of your pain, He begins to transform it. It may not happen immediately. The healing process can be slow and often painful. But the key is knowing that God is working through the pain, not leaving you in it. The healing that God offers doesn't mean that the pain will simply disappear. Sometimes the scars of pain remain as reminders of God's faithfulness. But these scars are not marks of defeat, they are symbols of survival. They are the evidence that you have endured, that you have made it through the fire, and that you are stronger on the other side. God's healing work in your life is often subtle, sometimes imperceptible at first. But it's happening. He is mending your broken heart, restoring the places that have been shattered, and making you whole again. Healing takes time, but God is never in a hurry. He knows the exact pace at which your heart needs to heal, and He meets you where you are, walking with you every step of the way. One of the most beautiful things about God's love is that He meets us in our brokenness and never leaves us there. His desire is always to bring us to wholeness. His love is not just about comfort in the moment, but about restoration to a better place. Pain has a way of changing us. It can harden our hearts, make us fearful, or leave us with a sense of loss. But God uses that same pain to soften our hearts, to draw us closer to Him, and to teach us to rely on His grace. We may not understand why we suffer, but we can be sure that God is using that suffering for our ultimate good. When we experience pain, it has a way of opening us up to others in a way that comfort and ease never can. There's a special kind of empathy that comes from shared suffering. When we go through a difficult experience and come out the other side, we are able to empathize with others in a deeper way. The pain we experience, though difficult, becomes a tool that God uses to help us serve others, to minister to those who are hurting in the same way we once were. God's comfort is not meant to be hoarded, it is meant to be shared. As God heals you, He enables you to comfort others with the same comfort He has given you. This is the beauty of God's redemptive plan. He doesn't just heal us for our own benefit, He heals us so that we can be vessels of His healing for the world around us. Your pain, when surrendered to God, becomes a testimony of His faithfulness, a story of His grace, and a message of hope to others who are struggling. God hears your heart and feels your pain, and He is working within you and through you, transforming your suffering into something beautiful. The journey of healing is not always easy, but it is always worth it. Every step you take toward healing brings you closer to the fullness of what God has for you. Every tear you shed is precious in His sight. Every moment of pain is an opportunity for God to reveal more of Himself to you. As you continue on this journey of healing, don't forget that God is always with you. His love for you is unshakable. His presence is constant. And His work in your life is ongoing. He will never leave you in your pain. His desire is to heal, restore, and make you whole. And even in the moments when you can't see the way forward, when the road ahead seems too hard to walk, remember that God is with you every step of the way. Your pain does not define you. It does not have the final word. God's love, His comfort, His healing, these are the things that define you. They are what will carry you through, and they are what will bring you to a place of strength, peace, and joy. And as you continue to walk through this life, remember that God sees you. He hears your heart. He feels your pain. And He will never, ever let you walk through it alone. As we continue to unpack this incredible truth that God hears your heart and feels your pain, it's important to remember that this is not just some distant theological concept. This is a living, breathing relationship. Our God is not removed from the details of our lives. He is intricately involved in every moment, every situation, every heartache we face. He hears the deepest cries of your heart, even when you don't have the words to speak. He feels every tremor of anguish in your soul, every weight of sorrow in your spirit, and he moves in compassion toward you. This understanding invites us to move closer to God, especially when the storms of life rage around us. It encourages us to open up our hearts and minds to his presence, knowing that he is not a distant observer, but a loving Father who walks with us through our darkest moments. It is a comfort to know that the very God who created the universe, the one who holds the stars in place, is also the God who takes the time to sit with us in our pain, to feel what we feel, and to respond with tender care. Now, we need to understand that God's response to our pain isn't passive. He doesn't just observe and feel sorry for us. He actively works to heal, restore, and transform our suffering. This is the beauty of the gospel, that God does not leave us in our brokenness, but he works tirelessly to make all things new. His healing power is alive and active in us, and he invites us into a process of transformation that takes place in the very midst of our pain. Pain in God's economy is never wasted. It is through the fires of adversity that we are refined, purified, and made stronger. God does not delight in our suffering, but he uses it as a means to draw us closer to himself, to mold us into the image of his Son, and to make us more resilient, more compassionate, and more dependent on his grace. Think about it. When we go through trials and hard patches, we often discover something deeper about ourselves and about God. Our faith becomes more real, more grounded, because we have encountered God in the midst of our pain. We learn to trust him in ways we never could have without the experience of hardship. And as we walk through the fire, we come out on the other side stronger, more refined, and more aware of God's love for us. This process of refinement is not always easy. It's painful. It stretches us. It challenges our beliefs, our comfort zones, and even our understanding of God. But it is in this very place that God's love and grace are most vividly revealed. He doesn't abandon us in the heat of the trial. Instead, he walks beside us, guiding us, strengthening us, and reminding us that he will never leave us or forsake us. When we face the trials of life, we often have two choices: to either run from God or run toward him. In our pain, we can either retreat into isolation, allowing our suffering to harden our hearts and drive a wedge between us and God, or we can draw near to him, trusting that he is right there with us, feeling our pain and providing us with the strength we need to endure. The choice is ours, but the invitation remains the same. God is waiting for us to come to him with our hearts open, our burdens laid bare, and our trust fully placed in his ability to heal and restore. This is where faith becomes real. Faith is not just something we talk about in good times, when everything is going well. Faith is something that is forged in the fire of suffering, when everything seems uncertain and the road ahead is unclear. It is in those moments that our faith is tested, refined, and made stronger. Faith is the assurance that God is present, even when we can't feel him. The confidence that he is working, even when we can't see it. And the trust that he will bring us through to the other side. In those moments of pain, it's essential to remember that God's love for you has never wavered. It doesn't diminish because of your circumstances. God's love is constant, unchanging, and unbreakable. His presence is unwavering. He does not leave you or forsake you. In your pain, he is there. In your sorrow, he is near. And when you cannot carry the weight of your suffering, he will carry it for you. His grace is sufficient for you. His strength is made perfect in your weakness. And while God's response to our pain may not always be immediate or in the way we expect, He is always at work. Sometimes the healing we need doesn't come in a moment, but over time, as we continue to trust Him, to lean on Him, and to surrender our pain to Him. This process of healing often involves patience. It involves waiting on God, trusting in His timing, and knowing that He is working behind the scenes, even when we cannot see it. In times of suffering, it can be easy to feel as though the pain will never end, as though the storm will never cease. But the truth is that God is working in ways that we cannot always understand. His purpose is greater than our pain, and His plan for our lives is filled with hope. Even when things seem bleak, remember that God is bringing about a greater good, a greater purpose that we may not be able to see right now, but will one day fully understand. God's heart is for restoration. His desire is not to leave us in our brokenness, but to heal us, to make us whole. He has come to bind up the brokenhearted, to set the captives free, and to bring beauty out of ashes. No matter how shattered you may feel in this moment, God is working to restore what has been lost, to rebuild what has been torn down, and to heal what has been broken. This is the promise of redemption, that God will not allow our pain to have the final word. Pain is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning of a journey toward healing, growth, and restoration. The hope of the gospel is that God can take the most painful, broken parts of our lives and transform them into something beautiful. He can take our suffering and turn it into something that brings glory to His name and hope to others. We may never fully understand why we suffer, but we can always trust that God is with us in it. And as we endure, we can be confident that God is using our pain for His purposes. Our pain is not pointless. It is not in vain. God is working in ways that are beyond our comprehension. And in the end, His purpose will be revealed. And so we walk forward knowing that we are not alone in our pain. We walk forward with the confidence that God hears our hearts and feels our pain. We walk forward with the peace that comes from knowing that our suffering is not the end of the story. We walk forward step by step, knowing that God is with us, healing us, and restoring us every day. So whatever you may be facing right now, whether it's a small struggle or a deep, overwhelming pain, take heart. God sees you. God hears you. God feels your pain. And He is working in ways you may not yet see, but will one day fully understand. Keep trusting Him. Keep leaning on His grace. Keep moving forward in the strength that He provides, knowing that He will never leave you, never forsake you, and will always be there to bring you through. God hears your heart. God feels your pain. And He will be with you always until the end. In our journey of healing and restoration, it is essential to realize that God's response to our pain is not just about relief in the moment, but about a deeper transformation in our hearts. God's healing is not always instant, nor is it always what we expect. Sometimes healing comes through a long process of surrendering our pain, learning to trust, and allowing God to shape us in ways we might not fully understand at first. But what we do know is that God's love is transformative, and He is not content to leave us in our suffering. He works in us and through us, even in the hardest moments, to bring us into a deeper relationship with Him. There is beauty in this process, even when we cannot immediately see it. When we face hardship, we often feel like we are being torn apart, but God is not just tearing us down for the sake of destruction. He is pruning us, refining us, and purging us of things that are not meant for our good. It is through these times of pain that we grow in ways that cannot happen when life is easy. We develop endurance, patience, and perseverance. We become more compassionate, more empathetic, and more dependent on God's grace. Through our pain, we begin to understand God's heart in a deeper way. We begin to experience His love and mercy in a way that only suffering can bring about. It is in our weakness that God's strength is most evident. The Apostle Paul understood this well when he said in 2 Corinthians 12:9, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. When we are weak, when we are broken, that is when God's grace shines through. He is not distant or indifferent to our pain. He is in it with us, using it to accomplish His will in our lives. And this is one of the most profound truths of our faith. God does not abandon us in our suffering, but enters into it with us. He doesn't offer us a vague, distant promise of comfort. He offers His very presence. He comes to us, meets us where we are, and carries us through. We don't have to walk this road alone. In every season of pain, we have a Savior who understands. Jesus, in His life on earth, experienced the full range of human emotions and suffering. He was rejected, misunderstood, and betrayed. He wept at the death of his friend Lazarus. He felt the pain of physical agony when he was beaten, mocked, and ultimately crucified. But He did all of this to show us that He is not a distant deity unaffected by our pain. He came to experience it all. He entered into our suffering so that we could find comfort in knowing that He understands. Jesus' life was a life of compassion. He was constantly moved by the pain of others, and He responded with mercy. When the sick came to Him, He healed them. When the broken were brought before Him, He restored them. When the grieving cried out to Him, He wept with them. His life exemplifies the heart of God toward our pain, one of deep empathy and love. And because of His deep love, Jesus invites us to come to Him with our burdens. In Matthew 11:28, He says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Jesus doesn't call us to bear our burdens alone. He invites us into rest with Him. He promises to take our heavy loads and to carry them for us. And when we come to Him, we find not just relief from our burdens, but also comfort in His presence. We are never alone in our suffering because He is with us. And His peace fills our hearts, and His peace fills our hearts in the midst of the storm. God does not promise to remove every difficulty from our lives. In fact, He warns us that we will face trials. But He does promise that He will be with us through it all. He will never leave us nor forsake us. His love is steadfast and unwavering, and His comfort is real. This assurance is what sustains us in our pain. It's also important to note that our pain is not something that is wasted in God's economy. Even when we can't see the purpose behind our suffering, God is working in ways we may not understand. He is shaping us, refining us, and preparing us for something greater. The psalmist wrote in Psalm 56:8, you keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book. This verse reminds us that God does not dismiss our pain. He sees it, He values it, and He uses it to form us into who we are meant to be. And when we are healed, we are not only restored for our own benefit, we are also equipped to help others. There is a powerful truth in the reality that God's healing work in our lives is never just about us. When we walk through pain and come out the other side with God's help, we are able to minister to others in ways that we never could have without our own experiences. We can offer comfort, encouragement, and hope to those who are going through similar struggles. We can testify of God's faithfulness, His grace, and His power to heal. God's healing work in us is always with a purpose: first, to bring us closer to Him, and second, to allow us to be a blessing to others. He takes our wounds and uses them to equip us for service in His kingdom. The very thing that once caused us pain becomes the vessel through which God demonstrates His glory. This healing process can sometimes be slow. It may not happen on our timetable, and it may not always come in the way we expect. But one thing we can be certain of is that God is faithful. He is always at work in us, even when we cannot see it. Healing is a journey, not a destination. It involves small steps of faith, small moments of surrender, and trusting that God is leading us to a place of wholeness, peace, and joy. Even in the midst of the struggle, God's love remains constant. The more we lean into Him, the more we discover that He is our refuge, our strength, and our source of comfort. As we allow Him to carry us through our pain, we begin to see His power at work in our lives. We begin to recognize His voice in the stillness of our hearts, His presence in the quiet moments, and His love in the midst of the storm. No matter what you are facing right now, know that God hears your heart and feels your pain. You are not alone. He is with you, and He will never leave you. His love is sufficient. His grace is enough. And in His perfect timing, He will bring healing to your heart, peace to your soul, and joy to your spirit. Trust in His process, lean into His presence, and allow Him to do His work in you. He will carry you through, and He will bring you to a place of healing and restoration. Your pain does not have the final say. God's love does. And through His love, you will find the strength to endure, the peace to persevere, and the hope to rise above every circumstance. Because God hears your heart, He feels your pain, and He is with you every step of the way. One of the most powerful demonstrations of Jesus' healing can be seen in the story of the woman with the issue of blood, a woman who had been suffering for 12 long years. Her story is an example of both the agony of prolonged pain and the overwhelming power of Jesus' touch. In Mark 5:25-34, we read about her desperate condition. She had spent all her money on doctors seeking a cure for her illness, but nothing had worked. She was left physically exhausted, financially drained, and emotionally broken. Her suffering was not just physical, but also social, as the disease had made her ceremonially unclean, causing her to be isolated from others. But this woman, in her desperation, heard that Jesus was coming through her town. She had heard stories of His miracles, how He had healed the sick, cast out demons, and restored the broken. So despite the crowds and her own sense of unworthiness, she decided to approach Jesus. She thought to herself, if I can just touch His clothes, I will be healed. She didn't need Jesus to lay hands on her or speak a word. She simply believed that His presence was enough. And as she reached out in faith and touched the hem of His garment, something incredible happened. In that very moment, Jesus' healing power flowed into her. She felt in her body that she was instantly healed of the affliction that had tormented her for years. But here's where the story takes a beautiful turn. Jesus, sensing that power had gone out from Him, stopped and asked, "Who touched me?" His disciples were puzzled. After all, the crowds were pressing in on all sides, but Jesus, in that moment, recognized the touch of faith, the touch of someone who had believed that He could heal. The woman, trembling with fear, came forward and fell at Jesus' feet, telling Him the whole truth. She revealed to Him her pain, her years of suffering, and her desperate faith. And what was Jesus' response? He didn't scold her for her approach. He didn't tell her she had overstepped, nor did He criticize her for seeking healing in such a way. Instead, He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." In that moment, Jesus not only healed her physically, but He also restored her emotionally and spiritually. He called her daughter, a term of deep affection and validation, acknowledging her as a beloved child of God. This story of healing is significant for many reasons. First, it reveals that Jesus hears the cry of the heart. This woman didn't need to say a word. Her faith spoke louder than her circumstances. Even though she was isolated, marginalized, and suffering in silence for so many years, Jesus knew exactly what she needed. He felt her pain, and He responded with compassion. He didn't just heal her body, He also healed the wounds of her heart. He restored her dignity, her worth, and her place in the community. What's remarkable here is the woman's act of faith. Despite her shame, Despite the risk of rejection, she believed that Jesus could heal her. And in doing so, she showed us that God responds to faith, not just faith that he can heal, but faith that he will heal. The woman didn't wait for perfect circumstances. She didn't wait until she had everything figured out. She simply reached out in faith, and Jesus met her right where she was. In the same way, when we bring our pain, our struggles, and our brokenness to Jesus, he responds with healing power. He is always ready to restore, always ready to bring peace to the restless heart, and always ready to meet us in our suffering. In addition to this, the story reminds us that healing is not just about physical restoration. Jesus, in his encounter with this woman, went beyond the physical to bring emotional and spiritual wholeness. She had been ostracized, cast out, and treated as an outcast because of her illness. Her isolation was not just a result of her physical condition, but also a reflection of how society viewed her as unclean. But when Jesus healed her, he brought her back into the fold. He restored her to her community, to her family, and to the life that had been taken from her. In the same way, when Jesus heals us, he doesn't just address the external symptoms. We are made whole in every part of our being, body, soul, and spirit. But this is not the only example of Jesus healing those who are broken. Throughout the Gospels, we see numerous stories of Jesus stepping into the pain of the world, healing the sick, giving sight to the blind, and raising the dead. In Matthew 9:35, it says that Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. He didn't limit his healing to only a few. He reached out to the marginalized, the diseased, the oppressed, and the lost. His heart was for the hurting, and his power was always available to those who reached out to him in faith. There's another powerful account in Luke 7:11-17, where Jesus encounters a funeral procession in the town of Nain. A widow's only son had died, and the woman was overwhelmed with grief, having already lost her husband. The people in the town were mourning with her, and when Jesus saw her, he was moved with compassion. The Bible tells us that Jesus' heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry then." In an incredible act of mercy, he touched the coffin, and the dead man was raised to life. Not only did he bring this young man back from the dead, but he also restored the widow's hope, her future, and her joy. Jesus felt the depth of her pain, and he responded not just with words of comfort, but with an act of divine intervention. Again, we see the pattern. Jesus is not a distant God who watches from afar. He is a God who comes near, who enters into our grief and our pain, and who heals in ways that only he can. When we are overwhelmed, when we are lost in our sorrow, Jesus is there to restore and to bring life to what seems dead. Jesus' healing is not just physical, it is holistic. It touches every part of our being. Whether we are facing physical illness, emotional turmoil, or spiritual dryness, Jesus has the power to heal. He hears the cries of our hearts, and he is moved with compassion. He knows the pain we carry, and he longs to bring healing to our lives. In our own lives, when we are struggling with illness, loss, or heartache, it can be easy to feel forgotten or abandoned. We may wonder if anyone truly understands the depth of our pain. But Jesus, in his love and compassion, assures us that he understands. He hears our cries, he feels our pain, and he is more than willing to heal us. His healing power is available to us today, just as it was when he walked the earth. All we need to do is come to him in faith, trusting that he is who he says he is, the healer, the restorer, the one who makes all things new. Just like the woman who reached out to touch the hem of his garment, we are invited to reach out to Jesus with our pain, our suffering, and our brokenness. And just like her, we can experience his healing power, his restoration, and his peace. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The same Jesus who healed the sick, raised the dead, and restore the brokenhearted is the same Jesus who stands ready to heal and restore you today. His heart for you is one of love, compassion, and mercy. He hears your heart. He feels your pain. And he is ready to heal you, just as he healed those who came to him with faith. As we come to the end of this reflection on God's heart toward our pain, let us remember the powerful truth that Jesus is not a distant observer of our suffering. He is a compassionate healer who enters into our pain, understands our deepest struggles, and offers his presence and power to restore us. Jesus' message is clear: you are not alone in your suffering. Whether you are facing physical pain, emotional heartbreak, or spiritual weariness, Jesus is present with you in the midst of it. Just as he healed the sick, restored the broken, and raised the dead, he is ready to heal you, to restore your joy, and to breathe new life into every area of your heart. Jesus does not promise that life will be free of pain, but he does promise that he will never leave us or forsake us. He is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit, Psalm 34:18. His heart is filled with compassion, and his arms are open wide to embrace you. He invites you, just as he did to the woman with the issue of blood, to come to him in faith, to reach out to him, and to trust that his healing power is enough for every hurt, every loss, and every fear you face. When we look to Jesus, we see that his healing is not just physical, it is holistic. He heals our bodies, restores our spirits, and transforms our hearts. He brings peace to the anxious, hope to the hopeless, and joy to the broken. In his presence, our pain does not have the final word, his love does. You are loved beyond measure, and your pain matters to him. So no matter what you are going through today, know that Jesus sees you, hears you, and feels your pain. He is ready to meet you right where you are. Reach out to him with faith, just as the woman did, and experience the peace, restoration, and healing that only he can provide. He is not just a healer, he is your Savior, your comforter, and your friend, and he will walk with you through every trial, carrying your burdens and bringing you into a place of wholeness. Remember this message: Jesus hears your heart, feels your pain, and has the power to heal you completely. Trust in him. He is with you always,